Hi, friends. I am so excited and honored today to have as my guest Rabbi Jason Sobel. And if you are familiar with The Chosen, I know that you have seen him speak with Dallas and give different little videos that he does himself about Jesus and Israel. And he is just a wealth of knowledge. And I'm so excited for what he's going to share with you today. So, welcome, Rabbi Jason.
Shalom, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is just a thrill. So, I want to start out. There are so many people who are hurting and they don't feel like celebrating Christmas. But what I like to point people to is that we can celebrate Jesus. We don't
Yeah.
have to celebrate the traditions, but there's so much to celebrate. And you bring such a great perspective that many of us growing up in Christian church don't realize about some of the backstories to things. And so I'm thrilled that you can address some of these
Mhm.
things for us. So, the first question that comes to mind that I like to ask you is every year I get people that say we shouldn't celebrate Christmas because it's pagan. So, could you address that, please?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'll start off by saying that, I grew up in a Jewish family, and so Christmas was not something I celebrated as a child growing up. So I say it's just say it's not like it is a tradition that I have a bias towards. Okay, because obviously Jewish people celebrate Hanukkah. We don't celebrate Christmas. But after coming a follower of Yeshua, Jesus, and becoming a messianic rabbi, obviously the birth of the Messiah is such an important thing. And truly, the birth of Jesus, the birth of Yeshua, is the birth of hope. And that's just a really important thing to remember and to celebrate. And I think there's something known as, I mean, I hear this too, there's something known in formal logic as the genetic fallacy. And the genetic fallacy basically says where something comes from determines its meaning for all time. And that's a logical fallacy, right? What where something comes from does not determine what it means, right? You have to look what it means in the contemporary culture. You have to look at what it means and the reasons for the people that are celebrating it. And that's an important point because when you look at the when you look in the scriptures, right, the central focus of worship was the temple in Jerusalem, and that which God gave the design for that temple. And Yeshua, Jesus, went up and celebrated in that temple in many different places throughout the Gospels. And actually, the temple was based off of an Assyrian design, right? It borrowed from Assyrian culture and imageries and the construction, and that was pagan, right? So the most holy house of God took aspects from the pagan culture and incorporated into the very place where God's presence dwelt. And I think that underscores this genetic fallacy that just because something comes from somewhere, that doesn't determine all time what it means. And so I think what happened with the temple and is the same thing that kind of has happened with some of these Christian holidays like Christmas, right? They were originally pagan holidays, and the believers understood that these were so ingrained into the culture that there was no way to get rid of them. And so what did they do? Instead of getting rid of them, they said, look, let's not throw them out, but let's sanctify them by putting a godly purpose or meaning into it. And I think that's actually part of what we're called to do, right? We're called to take the things of this world and sanctify them for the purposes and plans of God and draw people to the Lord through them. And so, what started out as pagan, when it is focused on understanding the birth of the Messiah, is actually a good thing because I don't think it matters to the Lord when we celebrate his birth, as long as we celebrate his birth, right? I mean, more of my concern, I think more people's concern should be less about the pagan origins of Christmas and more about the secularization of Christmas,
Mm.
which is becoming just about gifts and devoid of anything spiritual and related to the birth of the Redeemer and the promised Messiah, because the Bible doesn't tell us the day that it was born. If it was important to celebrate it on an exact day, the Bible would have given us the exact day, and we would have known the exact way on how to celebrate it. And it doesn't give us any of that. And so there, when it doesn't, it gives us the freedom. And I think that the one thing I will say is that I think, obviously, as a Messianic rabbi and as someone who likes to connect the teaching between the old and the new, I think I think believers should get in touch with their Jewish roots and understand the biblical holidays like Hanukkah, like Passover. Jesus didn't celebrate Passover; he didn't celebrate Easter. He celebrated Passover. But that being said, it doesn't have to be about subtraction. It can be about addition, right? I mean, I don't believe, necessarily that Jesus was born on December 25th. I believe he was probably born on the Feast of Tabernacles, which is in the fall. But again, it doesn't make a difference because the Bible doesn't tell us we can have addition and add these things without subtracting one or the other.
Right. You're so good at adding things. And I didn't mention your books, but I really highly recommend your books to everybody. They've just added so much to my own walk. And your latest one, Mysteries of the Messiah, just it's like opening up a treasure trove of exciting new discoveries for some of us that maybe didn't have the background that you do with your Hebrew and stuff. So could you, one of the first thing that I heard you speak about when you came on my radar a few years ago was talking about Bethlehem and the swaddling clothes and the significance of all that. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, I think at this time of the season where everyone is reading the birth narratives in the Gospels, and so many people have heard the story over and over again, but like when we see it in high definition and get how all the details have such rich meaning, it really makes it come alive, right?
Yes.
And so when we read about the birth of, when we read about the announcement of the angels of the birth of the Messiah to the shepherds in the field, the angels say, a Savior is born to you this day in Bethlehem, and this is the sign: a baby will be wrapped in swaddling cloth, lying in a manger. And you're like, hold on a second. Like, angels are sent by God from heaven, and the sign, which could be any sign that God could have performed, is a baby lying in baby wrapped in swaddling cloth, lying in a manger. It's like, come on, God, this is like, doesn't seem to make sense, right? But when you understand the symbolism and what's going on in the context and the details, it makes perfect sense. Because one of the things that kind of gets lost over time and kind of confused is that these shepherds were ignorant and unlearned individuals. That is not the case. The shepherds in Bethlehem were Levitical shepherds. They were shepherds who were commissioned as part of their priestly responsibilities to raise the sheep and the lambs and the animals that were to be offered in the temple in Jerusalem. And so these individuals were not unlearned because they had to be familiar with all the requirements to make sure that the animals stayed kosher and everything necessary according to the Torah. And so what would happen is when it was time for these for the lambs to be born, they would bring them into these caves around Bethlehem. Well, that's misconception number two. Jesus wasn't born in a wooden manger. That's like the nativity scene. We have these wooden mangers. And that's the oldest Christian tradition, right, is clear about this, right? He was born in a cave.